Hello, I'm Vernon O'Reilly-Ramesar, and I'm going to have a one-on-one today with Bruce Bishop, who is an author and who I've known for very many years. Bruce, thank you for agreeing to chat with me.
Well, I'm happy to be here, Vern.
Now, I've known you for a long time, and you've always been involved with something creative in travel writing, for example. But all of a sudden, since the pandemic started, you have now become the author of two of your own books of fiction. What was the inspiration for getting going? Was it the pandemic?
I think a large part was the pandemic because I had two or three fairly good freelance contracts, writing contracts here in the city that suddenly dried up because of the pandemic. They ceased print publication, so I lost my freelance job. And I thought, okay, I guess it's time. We're in a lockdown. There's not much else to do but wait this one out. And I'd already started a rough outline of the first novel anyway, and I just really hunkered down and decided to write a whole first draft.
And I guess having the experience of writing the first one, you realized you needed to write the second one.
Well, not right away, although I guess I was anxious to write the second one because there was a fair amount of buzz and success after the first one was released, and people had written me and said, well, what happens to certain characters? So that certainly helped and inspired me to write the second book. But they're interlinked. They can be read by them, each is a standalone book. You don't have to read Unconventional Daughters before you read Uncommon Sons. You could read one or the other at the beginning. So
I guess, as they say nowadays, they're part of the same universe.
I guess, yes.
Now, you've chosen to write basically history-inspired fiction. Would that be a fair categorization?
Well, the overall genre that's known around the world is historical fiction. That's correct. I've since come to realize that historical fiction, my gosh, it encompasses literally all of civilization, and there are a lot of writers that, for example, will only write about ancient Rome or the medieval times or King Arthur's times or whatever. It's a very all-encompassing genre, and I'm personally much more interested in just the early part of the 20th century. And so when I found, or when I kind of rediscovered some old handwritten letters that I had since I was a teenager that were written in 1927, I thought, well, I guess there's my cue. I can take those letters and then build a storyline around it.
So with the first book, Unconventional Daughters, you had that basis to get going on, which was the daughter who ended up marrying her stepfather.
That's right.
Uncommon Sons, is that purely from your imagination?
Yes, it is really. I had nothing to inspire it except for the fact that I had already begun discussing the protagonist of the second book in the first book, and he happened to be the protagonist's best friend. So Mark Yusuf, the protagonist in the second book, we learn a lot more about him than we did in the first book because he was a secondary, almost like a bit player in the first book.
So flesh it out a little bit for us to give us a taste of what the storyline is about.
Of which book? The second?
Uncommon Sons.
Okay. Uncommon Sons takes place in Halifax, Nova Scotia in 1935-36, in the middle of the Great Depression. And we're following the lives of really three main characters: Mark Yusuf, Eva McMaster, his best friend, who we met in the first book, and Ian Leslie, the antagonist, or one of the two antagonists in the second book. Mark is a 34-year-old hotel dining room manager. He happens to be Lebanese Nova Scotian, a first-generation Canadian. He also realizes that he's gay, and of course, in those days, the word homosexual was barely even used, let alone the word gay came along many decades later. So he has to keep his own personal life hidden, and he ends up being infatuated by a co-worker at the hotel and that's the Ian Leslie character. And not a nice guy. The guy is married. He is also hiding his sexuality. In fact, won't even come to grips with his sexuality. And he is also implicated in a possible murder of two guests, or at least one guest at the hotel. So Uncommon Sons, I guess in some ways you could just say, well, it's a murder mystery. But it's so much more than that because of the fact that the characters reflect a lot of people that we know today. Our immigrant friends who are recently here in Canada or in Nova Scotia, African Nova Scotians who have always experienced a level of systemic racism here in Nova Scotia. And in those days, in the 1930s, they were called either Negro or colored. And then, of course, the Lebanese immigrants, too, that came to Canada in the 1880s and worked very, very hard. And there's quite a large Lebanese Nova Scotian community throughout the province. So I think the book will appeal to people that, I guess, like a basic murder mystery, but also just want to read more about what average people dealt with during the Great Depression when you weren't white and heterosexual and, a Christian.
Did adding those layers of sociological complexity make it harder to write this book? Having to get your mind into the heads of these characters and the various aspects of their personalities and sexualities?
Yeah, most definitely. I guess in the current political climate that we live in these days, I'm taking it upon myself to have a protagonist who's Lebanese Nova Scotian and who happens to be gay. It's when you aren't African Nova Scotian, when you aren't Lebanese Nova Scotian, just like in the first book, when I'm not a gay woman or a lesbian, yeah, it's difficult to get into the heads of those characters, and the writer needs reassurance from people of those nationalities, communities, races, whatever, to not to validate necessarily what you're writing, but to proofread what you're writing so that it feels real to them. So in this case, I have friends from my hometown in Yarmouth, a black man and a white woman who were married almost a year after high school in the 70s. They're still married today, and they were valuable readers, manuscript readers that I had, so that they could tell me, are those characters I had in the book reflective of your own cultural and growing up experience? Similarly, with the Lebanese Nova Scotian character, I had a person from the consul's office in Halifax pretty much read the whole book in order to let me know where I went wrong in writing about the experiences of a Lebanese Nova Scotian family, albeit in the 1930s, not present day.
Were there any changes you had to make as a result of those consultations?
Yes. In fact, Mark Yusuf, the main character, in the first book, his surname is Charbel. And I found out through my source that Charbel is not a Maronite Catholic name, and that it would be better to change his name, his surname, to Yusuf. As well, I think, his mother's name in initially in the first draft, anyway, of what was it, Maya, and now she's Maryam, Maryam, because that's more in keeping with the Maronite Catholic names. So not major changes, but certainly things that a Lebanese Nova Scotian reading it would feel that, okay, he's got it right there. So.
And then you've placed it within a context of a time period, which obviously minorities have much to deal with today. You can only imagine back then. But was it difficult getting source material to inspire you to have a sense of what it was like living as a gay person of color or of Arabic descent?
I won't say it was terribly difficult, although there aren't really people around now who are still alive that could speak from that experience. But for example, with the African Nova Scotian character uh, um, in the novel, I wanted him to be one of the first cooks at this major hotel where the people were all working, and the first African Nova Scotian to be hired as a cook. I had him living in Africville, which for people that don't know and aren't part of Nova Scotian, the Nova Scotian scenery here, Africville was a black community that was bulldozed essentially in the 1960s and is no longer a community here in Halifax. So I had he and his grandmother in the book living in Africville. And again, I'm writing about a place that doesn't exist anymore, but certainly exists in the hearts and minds of African Nova Scotians. It was eye-opening, to say the very least, to read journals, to watch videos, to see what happened in the 1960s to this community. I learned an awful lot, and I think readers can learn a lot. But it's not pounding you over the head with history. It's more like this is the context of what was happening at the time.
Is that a delicate dance for you as a writer, to sort of try and avoid becoming a history book and instead concentrate on the fact that you're dealing with characters?
Absolutely. In the first book, I remember one of the beta readers. That's a person who reads the first draft of a novel. She had read a chapter where the main characters were at a fictitious club in Halifax that I called the Halifax Commerce Club. And in the first draft, I was trying to explain why during World War I, Halifax was such an important port for the British Navy. Anyway, this reader of the manuscript, the first draft manuscript of the first book, said, for God's sakes, stop dumping information." And that was the best lesson to learn, because so many authors do that without realizing it. They're telling constantly what's going on in the world at the time of, in the universe of the time of the novel, instead of showing what's really going on. And showing happens when you're describing things and feeling things and all that. But yeah, no more information dumps. That's something to be very wary of.
Did your long experience of travel writing help in writing the books?
It did in the first book, because the secondary setting takes place in Gothenburg, Sweden, and a little bit in Stockholm, and I've been to Sweden. But I think travel writing helps a person really observe other people and other cultures quietly. And that sticks with us, I believe, any writer, any author. When you travel the world and you realize just how similar we all are, with major differences, it makes it easier to write.
We're running out of time here, but I have to ask you, were there any lessons that you learned from writing your first book that helped you with the second book? Whether it's the whole idea of getting it published, of coming up with characters, of following a storyline, any of those things?
Yes, I guess in some ways, structure of a novel. For example, writing the debut novel, I thought, okay, I guess I can include letters, I can include journal entries, I can include newspaper stories, again, all made up, all fictitious. But I realized after writing it, I don't think I liked that so much. I mean, my readers to date haven't complained about it. In fact, many people have said they enjoyed the shorter chapters. But in the second book, I thought, I guess I want a more traditional novel at this point, and I will only use letters or newspaper stories or whatever very, very minimally, or sparingly rather. So I did learn that, yes.
So if someone's interested in following this murder mystery set in the Great Depression. How would they get a hold of Uncommon Sons?
Uncommon Sons, as well as Unconventional Daughters, they're both found on pretty much every Amazon platform in the world. All you have to do is type in either title or type in my name. And on both books, it's Bruce W. Bishop, because there's other Bruce Bishops out there. So it's Bruce W. Bishop. And you can order directly from Amazon. And also for those that have Kobo devices, Rakuten Kobo also stocks or has both novels as well.
Well, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, Bruce. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vernon. Appreciate it.